What's up, YouTube? You guys find that you're struggling with music theory and you don't really know when to add new melodic ideas to push the song forward between a verse, a hook, or other sections of the song? Well, today I'm going to teach you a few tips and tricks so that you can pose your entire song in one piano plugin and then expand all those ideas out into various instruments to make a full comprehensive beat. Let's get into it. Okay, so we are loaded back up in FL here. So here is the composition we're going to be making today. It's spread out over a number of instruments, so you can hear what it sounds like sort of as a final product. Okay. So that sounds pretty good. We have a number of instruments there. And why don't we check out what this sounds like exclusively on a piano? So I composed all of this working within just one keyscape instance, a piano VST. And so if you do that, it tends to result in a better outcome. As you're probably aware, you've probably heard a cover of a song before, and you've heard someone playing just the piano and singing along, and usually the songs that are pretty written pretty well and sound really good sound really great in this medium. And that kind of gives you the indication that if you do this sort of thing, you have all the little pieces that you need to break out and can spread along the frequency sort of range you have to work with across a number of instruments. So here is the entire composition, at least sonically, just played on one piano. So this is what we're going to be building up towards. So we can hear it's comprised of essentially chords of essentially 5 notes, a bass line, and a top melody line. So I've gone ahead and split these out in terms of the steps I did into a number of patterns here, so we can just sort of review what was done, and I don't have to slow you guys down following along. So first we have the 4 notes that I decided to start with. So you can do this for yourself, sort of make a simple, like very, very simple melody line that you're going to use to construct the chords. You don't want a lot of movement in this. That's why you see only 4 notes in 4 bars, and then it repeats. So we'll hear this first. So I'm using this sort of half step down here at the end to put a little bit of tension before we repeat into the next bar, and allowing it to resolve back up to the D sharp. And you'll notice that, again, as I said, there's not a lot of rhythm to that, so that we can really construct these chords. So next, what you're going to want to do is create the most basic of chords. So the simplest chord you can do is a triad, which is 3 notes. And so you notice that these chords I have here in this pattern all have that root note of the sort of basic melody that they're all built upon. The other thing you're going to want to know is essentially the way in which basic triads are constructed. So as you're probably all aware, C, the key of C, is the simplest sort of key to visualize on a piano, and it is all of the white notes. So let's draw those notes in just to examine how this this key is constructed. So this is the key of C. You can see all the white notes highlighted here. And the first, or the root note, is the C. The second is 2 semitones up. You can count them, 2 notes up, semitones. And the third is, again, 2 semitones up. The fourth being 1 semitone up from that. And then the fifth is 2 semitones up from the fourth. And so what you can see here is the major third in the case of this major C key is a total of 4 notes semitones up from the root C. The fifth is 7 semitones up. And so when we look at this, the key of C, the way in which we make it minor is we move this major third down one semitone, making it a minor third. And so essentially, we're just going to use this sort of concept to flush out these chords we have. So you can see that in the first instance, I've elected to do a minor third relative to the first note and the fifth. And you're going to repeat this choosing minor thirds or major thirds as well as the fifths across all of your starting notes, and that's going to allow you to create some chords. This is just a starting point for those who don't really have a big background in theory. You're going to want to play them one after the other, because there's sometimes that the chords will not sound great if you over and over pick the major third or the minor third just repeatedly across all your chords. You're going to want some variation in that. So play it back, hear where you're at, and make some tweaks until you find something that sounds pretty good. The other thing worth noting at this point is the concept of an inversion. And so what an inversion means is that you've just taken one chord that has been that you've constructed using this triad method, and you might flip one of these notes up or down an octave. So we can see that if I hold Control on my keyboard and up and down on the arrow keys, it will move this note I have highlighted up or down in an entire octave. And holding Shift will move it up or down a singular note. So if I move it down an octave, we can see that this actually forms the relationship of a minor third here, and then again we go four semitones up from that, making a total of 7 from the root note, and this is the fifth. So you can actually construct around your chords, not picking the root note, and then invert them, and you'll get different sort of sonic characteristics out of the same chord. So if I hold Alt and I right click, we can preview this sound. And if I move this down an octave, so that is the same chord, just sounds a bit more sort of weighty in this case. The other thing you're going to notice is across these chords, there is a note that carries on through the first three. That is D sharp in this case. The more notes you have that are shared between your chords as they move through, that will kind of pass on to the next chord in your chord structure, and will sort of give it a sort of guiding feel and make one chord flow into the next. So although these are two different chords in these cases, because they have different notes apart from that D sharp, having the similar note in the case of both of them will allow some cohesion and pass through in your structure. And that brings us to the last chord here, which shares none of the same notes as the previous chord. This will give the sense of a lot of tension, which will make the ear really feel happy once we return back to something that reminds us of the three chords we had before. And so that gives you tension that leads into the resolving feeling on the next bar. So let's hear this back. Cool. So let's move on to the next pattern. Here, what we've gone ahead and done is we've added an extra note that is either an octave above the root note in the case of this first chord, or much like I just reminded you that the second chord was actually an inversion of these three notes here, this triad here, I've gone ahead and added the lower octave to the top note, giving us essentially here some chords that have an additional octave of one of the notes. That sort of fills out your chords, gives them a little bit more high end or low end, depending on the octave you chose. So our chords feel a lot more full now. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add a lower octave to our chord structure. This is going to serve to create a bass line later. So you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of the note you select for the low end out of your chord structure here is has a decent amount of room from your chord structure. This will make it so that when you're arranging later, you can hopefully have a little bit of space that each sort of section takes up, and they're not sort of in the same frequency range competing for attention on that band of the frequency range. So let's hear it with this lower octave. That really lets it like rumble out, and it will allow us to make a bass line in a second. Next, what we've done is we have added in some upper notes on top of these chords. And so the way these notes, you may have heard previously someone say something like a C add 9, a C add something, right? And so the concept between when you hear someone say add X, it is an indication that you have a certain type of chord, and then you're adding in something that is typically an octave above. So an octave has 8 notes. So when you've hit the 8th note, you've returned back to the same root note, and the 9th will be the 2nd note of the next octave. So in this case, that's exactly what we've done. We've added a 9th here relative to the root note of D sharp, and this will give it a more bluesy feel. So in adding these notes that might be on the 2nd of the next octave, or the 4th or the 6th of the next octave, will give your chords a more bluesy feel, because they're adding in something that isn't the simple triad that we're all used to in regular pop music. So let's hear how this sounds with all these added upper harmonics. So that's already sounding really great. And you'll notice in this instance of the chords, we've done a few inversions. So although some of these chords may share the same notes when listed out, we have chosen to go ahead and change which ones are the notes that appear more than once, and which sort of octave range those notes may appear in, giving us a bit different of a feel in the second iteration of the chords. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take our bass line we previously had, and we're going to start adding rhythm to this bass line. So you can start cutting up your bass line notes. And additionally, we're going to want to add in some notes to give a transition to chords that you want to emphasize a bit more. So in this case, we're playing the root notes here of the respective chords, and then we reach up for a D sharp, which allows us to fall back down to the B of the next chord. So this gives a sort of feeling like it rises up and then it falls into the chord you're kind of trying to elicit. It's also pretty good if this note can happen to be one of the notes in the next chord. That plays upon the idea we just touched on, where you're trying to lead the listener to the next spot you want to land at. So you can see I've gone ahead and done that there. I've gone ahead and done that with this G sharp down here, and the sort of idea repeats. The other thing I've done is you'll notice that the 2 root notes here happen earlier than their respective chords. And this is sort of the same sort of idea with the leading notes I was talking about earlier. In letting, at certain moments, the bass come before the chords, it offsets them and it sets up anticipation for this final chord. So let's go ahead and listen. So that's sounding pretty good already. Our next step is to move into creating a melody. So I've gone ahead and made this top melody an octave above sort of where the chords finish, giving myself plenty of room and taking a different sort of frequency range. And we're really starting to fill out this concept of low to high on the piano. We're taking up as much room as we can, and that's why we're composing on one plugin, instead of trying to compose and find that we're competing for certain areas in the frequency range. So with this melody, what I've gone ahead and done is I've allowed the sort of faster paced notes within the melody, the rhythm of the melody, to happen at moments where the chords are fading out. This will allow the listener to hear these notes sort of without having to increase the volume of the notes. The listener will be more attracted to them as the chords fade out. Whereas if you try and make a lot of your melody moves in the first sort of half of the chord where the transient of the chords are happening, you'll find that you have to raise the volume to get the listener attracted to that part of your melody. So let's go ahead and listen. You'll also notice that I'm essentially trying to use a lot of this top melody to interact with the bass line, and a lot of these sort of quicker elements in the rhythm of the melody are playing off what is happening in the bass line, at times moving in the opposite direction. So as the bass line is rising, the melody is falling, and we're getting a feeling of things getting tighter on the frequency range and then expanding up and taking up more of the range as it falls into where you're leading the listener to. Okay, so from this point you can begin arranging your song. So you'll notice how I have my arrangement now. At the start, the intro of the song, I am doing an instance of the keyboard without the bass line present. And I am doubling up the chords played by the piano by a DX7, so an extra keyboard playing the chords to give it a bit of a different color to the chords. The top line, the melody, is being played by 2 synths simultaneously. This stacking of these elements allows me to put delay on the bell sound, but not the sound that is sort of longer holding, and it kind of gives it a interesting feel without muddying things up. So you'll hear this in a second. So you can hear that I have that delay, that echo on just sort of the bell noise of the lead, so that I can really make use of that space without feeling like the notes that are held by the other instance of the lead are also being echoed and just sort of muddying things up. So when it finally drops where all the instruments come in, what I've gone ahead and done is that is where the bass line comes in. So this gives it a feeling of things sort of being lighter, and then when it finally hits, the low end comes in. So hopefully you found this entire tutorial useful. Hopefully you can take some ideas for setting yourself up to create better compositions by really focusing in on creating on a singular plugin, and then taking those ideas and spreading them out across various instrumentation. So if you can, like and subscribe, really helps out. Toss a comment if there's something else you want me to cover in the future, and thanks for listening.